Just ignore it. It was easier said than done. And honestly, was it even a good idea? In my head, I ran through a list of potential voids that could have been lurking behind us. Of course, none of them were really ideal, especially not the rowdy clown, whose laugh sounded hauntingly similar to the one we were hearing behind us. And then we heard it again, louder this time. I muttered a barely audible, "fuck," in response. Realistically, if it did turn out to be one of the voids, putting up some kind of resistance would have been pointless anyway. We were as good as done for. With that logic in mind, I turned my attention back to the monitors, hoping that whatever the hell was behind us would stay put for a bit longer. In the meantime, Hugo and Cael were about to fight the gladiator and his minions.
"Hey, Englishman,"
Cael said.
"You regenerate quickly?"
Hugo sighed, stretching his neck out.
First of all, do not call me that. It's rather crass, and no, not much faster than the average man. But no matter. God has ordained me as a holy commission. He won't let me die until I've fulfilled my duty.
And Cael just laughed.
You're a real piece of work. Let's see if your God helps us make it out of this.
You two aren't who I'm looking for.
The gladiator bellowed before releasing both leashes.
Take out the trash.
The freak ran about 6 steps before having its face caved in and neck subsequently snapped by Hugo. In the meantime, the centipede began crawling towards Cael.
Who the fuck created this thing?
He asked, shuddering slightly. The centipede lifted itself up, swiping 2 of its arms at the visibly disturbed vampire.
Ah, shit, don't touch me!
He shouted before kicking its face, removing its muzzle in the process. He regretted that decision instantly. The centipede had 4 or 5 rows of spike-like teeth, with a horde of flesh-covered tentacles squirming out of its mouth. One of them grabbed Cael by the leg, dragging him down.
Oh, God damn it!
He shouted, attempting to squirm out of the appendage's grasp. Nevertheless, Hugo came to the rescue, turning the centipede's head into mush with one vicious stomp. He shot Cael a cold glaze.
Take his name in vain again, and our temporary alliance is over.
Cael shook the tentacle remnants off of his leg, his face still utterly disgusted.
Yeah. Holy fucking shit. That is nasty.
And then they both stared at the gladiator, who was grinning something malicious.
Congratulations. You two have earned the privilege of being my combat slaves.
Yeah, I'd rather fucking die.
Cael responded.
I submit myself to God and God only. Disease like you shall perish at his will.
Hugo added. The gladiator drew his smoldering sword, which must have been the size of a person.
So be it.
He roared. The two rushed him simultaneously, attempting to bury the burning menace with a flurry of quick strikes. But that wasn't the best idea. They couldn't even touch the gladiator without suffering from burns themselves. Cael sighed.
Some asshole just had to dig this fuck up, didn't they?
The gladiator stepped forward, unleashing a big swing that singed a few hairs off of Hugo's head.
Bastard!
He shouted before sending a hard cross at the gladiator, shattering his chestplate armor in the process.
You're pretty strong there, Britt. We might just win this one.
Cael grinned.
Like I said, God will give me enough strength to overcome these trials.
Hugo moved toward the gladiator with seemingly unwavering resolve, his eyes shining a bright crimson. His face was wrought with such intense, stoic determination that I nearly forgot that his ultimate goal was to commit global genocide and began cheering him on. The gladiator sneered at the challenge, swinging his blade once again. This time, Hugo deflected it with an elbow, cracking the metal while doing so. He followed up by directing a flying hook kick at the gladiator's jaw, managing to rip it off completely. Cael followed by biting into the gladiator's shoulder and tearing a large chunk off, burning most of his face in the process.
Ugh,
he said, spitting out the charred, undead flesh.
Not my cup of tea.
Are you alright?
Hugo asked, staring at his scorched face.
Yeah, it should heal up in no time.
However, the gladiator was relentless, letting out a frenzied roar before bolting towards Cael. He managed to dodge most of the gladiator's blows, only taking the full brunt of his last punch. Still, that one blow was enough to form a deep, fleshy crater in his torso, while also sending him flying into the steel rail, causing it to bend.
The fuck?
Cael stammered out, staring down at the unsightly wound.
Nope, that's not good.
Hugo exhaled.
This situation has become bothersome.
He went back after the gladiator, sending a ruthless barrage of strikes his way. There was an evident skill gap between the two voids, with Hugo landing about 90% of his attacks. On the other hand, the gladiator only managed to land 3 or 4 clean hits of his own. Nevertheless, each of them dealt far more damage than any of Hugo's. After about a minute of fighting, Hugo's left arm was completely mangled. His right ribcage had been shattered, and the entire right side of his face was burnt. The gladiator had also taken a fair amount of damage, but not nearly enough to even slow him down. Cael groaned as he attempted to insert himself back into the fight, but that task wasn't an easy one. He could barely move with his torso just about completely destroyed.
I suppose this must be my final trial,
Hugo said, somewhat solemnly.
What the hell are you talking about?
Cael asked, still groaning. And then, for the first time since we began watching, Hugo smiled.
God wills it.
Using his good arm, Hugo removed the upper section of his robe, revealing a pale, mutilated, scar-ridden body beneath. He muttered another prayer before looking up at the ceiling, tears now swelling up in his eyes.
Thank you,
He muttered. Along with his eyes, the scars on his body began glowing a deep red.
Tricks won't be enough.
The gladiator thundered before swinging his blade at Hugo's neck. I don't think I managed to catch exactly what happened next. However, I was certain that I was about to see a head rolling. The gladiator's blade shattered into what looked like a million pieces. At first, I didn't even notice the gaping hole in the gladiator's chest.
How did you?
The gladiator was interrupted by his neck being brutally cranked to the side. As the flaming behemoth dropped, so did Hugo. By then, Cael had regenerated to the point of being able to walk. He stumbled over to the near comatose bishop.
What the fuck was that?
He asked, half grinning.
I detached myself from my earthly limitations. An egregious sin, but I needed to fulfill my holy mission.
Well, shit. That's pretty cool, I guess. Not your psycho mission, but the whole detachment thing.
He held out his hand in an attempt to help Hugo get up. However, Hugo shook his head in response.
This is as far as I go. Not something I can recover from. I only have judgment to face now.
Oh, shut the fuck up.
Cael said, picking up Hugo's limp body and lumbering it over his shoulder.
We'll find you some painkillers and you'll be back on your feet in no time.
Why would you help me?
Hugo asked.
You understand what I'm after, don't you? My ideals.
Well, I don't think I could have handled the gladiator on my own, so I guess I owe you crazy fuck.
He looked over at Hugo and grinned.
And who knows? Maybe you'll learn something. Yeah, there's a lot of scum in the world, but there's also a lot of beauty. We don't have to destroy it all.
That's...
Hugo passed out before he could finish the thought. Still carrying him over his shoulder, Cael took off running down another corridor. I did a quick sweep of the other monitors. Satanbot had taken out 2 more of the lower-tier voids, while Morgie was engaged with a high hurricane void named the Mechanic, 6'5", 196 centimeters, 270 pounds, 122 kilograms. Like the name suggested, he was a very large, burly man in a mechanic's outfit that enjoyed obliterating skulls with blunt tools. It's a real ruthless guy. On another monitor, the undead Nazi had just finished slicing the shit out of the devil nurse, who was a mid-tsunami. So that's 12 down, I thought. 20 left. The shit show wasn't even anywhere near done. Check it out, Sandu said. There's still 4 voids who haven't escaped yet. Sure enough, he was right. First off, there was the Titan, 15 feet 7 inches, 475 centimeters, 1,438 pounds, 652 kilograms. A colossal entity with destructive capabilities that were nigh impossible to deal with. It was a humanoid with an immensely muscular frame, further accentuated by the fact that there wasn't an ounce of fat on his entire body. Its harder-than-steel skin was reddish and cracked all over, with a roadmap of razor-like veins bulging at every square inch. And then there was the face. It had 6 sets of glowing blue eyes and a mouth full of fangs that exposed gums that were caustic to the touch. His holding cell, if you could even call it that, was a bit more fortified than the rest. I'm under-exaggerating, of course. It was fortified to goddamn hell. No electronic locks connected to a central system either, which is probably what caused the breach to begin with. Good thing, too. He was a low asteroid. The next one up was the Warden, 8'7", 261 centimeters, 435 pounds, 197 kilograms. Ironically enough, this guy apparently used to run a prison of his own. What kind of prison that might be was beyond me. He had pale white skin, shadow-like eyes, long, slicked-back silver hair. His trench coat was long and perpetually bloody, sweeping the floor as he walked. I've heard stories about the guy. Supposedly, he killed upwards of 700 prisoners during a breach at his prison, managing to come out unscathed from a devastating explosion afterwards. He was as dangerous as a void could get without being considered asteroid tier, being a high hurricane. Funny enough, his cell was wide open, with guard bodies and destroyed mech suits littering the space, but instead of getting up and walking out, he simply sat, expression devoid of anything at all, like it usually was. Obviously, he was up to nothing good. The next one was quite the doozy, the strongest void in the entire chasm, in fact. He went by a simple moniker, the Calamity of Earth, or just the Calamity for short. Its gender was unknown, its height and weight unknown, appearance unknown to everyone except the top officials overseeing this entire fucking operation. Hell, we don't even know where it was kept. The only thing we had to monitor was a simple panel containing 3 lights. Green, safe, still contained. Yellow, breakout in progress, evacuate immediately. And red, breached, too fucking late. What did we know about this thing? Nothing, save for the fact that a breach would most likely result in a global catastrophe. Of course, it was a high asteroid, the only high asteroid in fact. And then there was the last, still captive void, but unlike the 3 overpowered monsters I've already talked about, he was a lot different. The kid is 5'6", 168 centimeters, 142 pounds, 68 kilograms. As his name implies, the kid was just that. A kid, from his appearance. He couldn't have been much older than 16 or 17 at most. The only thing we knew about him was that he apparently had extraordinary, undisclosed abilities. Abilities he used to slaughter his entire village back in Kerala, India. But who the hell knows what actually happened? To me, and nearly every other guard, he just seemed like your average, meek teenager. In fact, we rarely ever exerted caution around him. Unlike the rest of the voids in here, he just did as he was told, always with this incredibly sullen expression on his face. I suppose that I can't blame him, given the circumstances. We didn't even bother putting a threat level on him. Nevertheless, we were instructed to keep him there. There's a lot of stuff going on here in the chasm that us guards don't quite understand. I make no reservations about that. I know for a goddamn fact that not everything we're doing here is saintly work. Do a lot of voids in here deserve to be locked up? Not even. They deserve to be wiped off the face of the earth. I never understood why we bothered holding the more malicious ones, using taxpayer money just to keep them alive. And then there were the ones who I wasn't quite sure belonged here at all. Did they even do anything wrong? Who knows, but one thing was for sure. They were different. Exceptional, I guess. The subjects of state curiosity. I always tried suppressing these thoughts. I mean, who the hell was I? Just some random fucking guard. Not some arbiter of morality. Still. Fuck it, this isn't the time. So let's see, what happened next? I turned to face a random monitor, trying to take my mind off of the kid. I caught what appeared to be the middle of a fight, with the 2 combatants being Jack the Ripper, 6'1", 185 centimeters, 170 pounds, 77 kilograms, the infamous serial killer. Apparently, he'd performed some arcane ritual while on death's door that granted him an extended lifespan and superhuman strength in exchange for what was left of his already dwindling humanity. He hardly resembled a human when we caught him, with a mouth full of sharp, rotting teeth, eyes sunken beyond reason, and a face riddled with cuts, burns, and various infections. He was quite the sore sight to behold. At that moment, he was once again at death's door. The person who put him there? Bella Vauclain, aka the Bloody Painter. 5'5", 165 centimeters, 122 pounds, 55 kilograms. Despite looking more or less like a normal woman, she was a brutal assassin that wasn't too concerned with the aftermath of her job. After killing her target, she painted a bloody picture on the walls. Sometimes she'd supplement her art with a few organs. She wasn't incredibly strong, but that didn't matter all too much. She had this obscure ability where she could summon blades out of thin air at the tips of her fingers, and then use some Esper-like ability to shoot them off in rapid succession, almost at a machine gun-like rate of fire. She had no problems reducing her targets to mincemeat. The ones she really disliked, that is. When we finally captured her, she maintained that she only killed the ones who really deserved it. However, any chance of appeal, not that there was a chance to begin with, was shattered when she punctured the throats of 3 guards. She still claimed that it was an accident to this day. Do I believe her? Well, it's about 50-50 with me. Like I said, she had Jack on the ropes, with what must have been over 100 blades planted firmly within the killer's body, including both of his eyes. Still, he had yet to give up as he swung Wirehead's bat. He must have picked it up, blindly and wildly around him. Bella wasn't unscathed herself. It looked as if she'd taken a couple of pretty bad hits to her ribcage and thigh. In addition to that, she had a gnarly bite mark on her hand. Nevertheless, she smiled as she pointed her fingers like a pistol at the frenzied Jack.
Profilé de l'enfer,
she said before blasting the killer to shreds, finally ending his grim legacy. Once she was done with that, she let out a loud sigh, clutching her ribs and wincing in pain. Unlike most of the other voids, she wasn't capable of taking too much punishment. After walking for a bit, she came across Luz. While still badly mangled from his confrontation with Wirehead, he was walking again. I didn't even know that he could regenerate that quickly. The two stared at each other for about half a minute before Bella stuck out her hand and smiled. It was a risk, for sure, but while Luz didn't reciprocate the smile, he cooperated, accepting the handshake without electrocuting her. Another team-up, and one that I wouldn't necessarily have expected. I did another quick sweep of the monitors. Morgie had taken out the mechanic, although he was limping now, and his next fight wasn't going to be an easy one. He was a few steps from coming across Satanbot. In the meantime, and funny enough, the undead Nazi was about to square off with the sadistic Soviet. 6'2", 187 centimeters, 215 pounds, 98 kilograms. Low earthquake tier. Instead of being zombified like the Nazi, he was more mechanical. More specifically, he was about 60% robotic, with his human bits slowly beginning to rot away. The surgeon was engaged in a bloody duel with Spider-Man. 6'9", 206 centimeters, 215 pounds, 102 kilograms. Unlike Peter Parker, this guy was basically just a large tarantula with human skin and a half-human head. Cael and Hugo were in the medical center, with the former tending to the latter's wounds. I thought about everything for a second, trying to run the numbers through my head. There were 4 more voids that had definitely escaped that I hadn't seen yet on any of the monitors, but I was only really concerned about 2 of them. You see, within the chasm, there were 4 asteroid-tier voids in total. 2 of them were still contained. The problem was rather obvious. Beyond that, there were now 14 voids dead, 4 who still haven't joined the fight, 14 currently active. All 4 asteroids still in play, 3 high earthquakes as well. TFV&H likely on their way. Holy fuck, I thought to myself. The real fight hasn't even started yet. A bout of sudden, ruckus laughter nearly gave me a heart attack. I looked at Sandu, but his face was dead serious. That meant... shit. With everything that was going on, I completely forgot about the elephant in the room, but sure enough, they were finally ready to reveal themselves. As footsteps began emanating from the darkness behind us, I braced myself for whatever horrific entity we were surely about to encounter. But instead of that, it was an unfamiliar guy that looked to be in his mid-20s with messy, dirty blonde hair dressed in a Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts. He was probably about 5'10", 130 pounds, soaking wet. "What the hell?" Sandu said upon seeing him. The man continued laughing as he strolled towards us. "Oh, man," he blurted out in between chuckles. "There's shit in both your pants right now, isn't there?" "Don't lie to me." Well, the joke's gone on long enough." "Who the fuck are you?" Sandu asked, sounding somewhat agitated. The man put his arms up in an ostensibly defensive manner. "Relax, I'm just an observer here." But his bloodshot eyes seemed to bulge out as they wandered over to the monitors. "It looks like the preliminaries are over. Time for the good stuff."